really a combination of several presentations that we've put together over the years. A couple of years ago, we were at St. Lucia for a training event, and unfortunately, last year we couldn't hold the training event that we wanted to or that we had scheduled. But it's what it is, and that's where we are right now. So in any case, let me just go ahead and share my. Do you want me to share my screen,
Okay,
Ignatius?
yeah. Just before you start, just let me
Yeah.
do a quick introduction to you and Earl. Just to say, everyone, good afternoon and welcome to our CAWASA Water Operators webinar, Wednesday webinar. And today we are joined with the Chlorine Institute of the USA. And we have Mr. Marco Guzman of the Chlorine Institute and Mr. Earl White, who is going to come on a bit later. And Mr. Earl White brings tremendous experience. He is a member of he works with the Allied Universal Corporation, and he has been involved in the chloralkali business from the bottom to the top in various capacities. So I wouldn't go into, he has a very well decorated CV, and I wouldn't go into all of it, but we want to welcome him and thanks for joining us this afternoon, giving us your time. So let's roll because we are about 9 minutes after time.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, you can share your screen, yeah.
Okay. So, okay. I hope you can see my screen now. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got you.
So training, very quickly, just some of the training objectives for today's presentation. We want to introduce to you what the Chlorine Institute is. We want to provide some overview of chlorine chemical and physical properties, including health effects, exposure treatment, personal protective equipment or PPE. We want to provide an overview of chlorine emergency response methods, give you an overview of chlorine packaging process overviews, review safe chlorine handling practices, give you an overview of the regulatory requirements for chlorine, and provide an overview of additional resources and training available. So let me start off with telling you what the Chlorine Institute is all about. So it's a non-profit technical trade association established in 1924. So a couple of years we'll be turning 100. We maintain a chlorine emergency plan called CHLOREP, develop technical and safety related publications, pamphlets, videos, and we also provide training workshops like this one. Although virtual, most of the times we try to provide it hands-on. So like I said, a couple of years ago, we were in St. Lucia. Really look forward, hopefully by the end of this year and maybe next year, have another training in the Caribbean. And we also have videos there. We have a YouTube channel where all the videos to Chlorine Institute practices, how to handle, how to operate containers, 1-ton containers, cylinders, responding to emergencies are located. We work with the Department of Transportation in the United States, the Occupational Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Homeland Security. Our goal is to advance health, environment, safety, and security of these mission chemicals. Primary number one is perhaps chlorine, it's in the name, but there's also other mission chemicals. Certainly sodium hypochlorite, also known as bleach, which a lot of water and wastewater treatment plants utilize for water chlorination, purification. And there's a couple others. Mission chemicals are essential for the Chlorine Institute to make sure they're used safely. Um, so these type of trainings are the type of trainings that we put together for you today have been done in association with Transcare. Transcare is an association in the United States, short for Transportation Community Awareness and Emergency Response. So established in the late 80s, the goal was to assist communities preparing for potentially hazardous materials incidents. We wanted to provide in-person and virtual training, training materials, partner with railroads, chemical producers, industry groups. Goals to provide volunteer hazmat instructors. And there's a wide number of resources available at their website, transcare.com. Chemtrek, this is a 24/7 hotline for emergency responders. It stands for Chemical Transportation Emergency Center. The goal of this group or this group within the American Chemistry Council is providing crucial information and assistance for transportation incidents involving chemicals and hazardous substances, not just chlorine, but many others. I mean, there's over 6 million of safety data sheets. They have a very wide and dynamic database on medical experts, chemical toxicologists, and they provide, all sorts of treatment, even if it's remotely, even if it's through the phone. They try to provide that advice to you. So even though you're not located in the United States, within the continental U.S., you can also use Chemtrek to call them, as they have nearly 200 languages worth of different safety data sheets for in the event of emergencies involving non-English speaking stakeholders. Now, starting with the uses of chlorine, I can, as you can see this pie chart, there's various uses. A lot of people normally think that disinfection or the use of chlorine as water disinfectant is the number one. It's actually not true. PVC piping, as you know, is widely used. Probably is the number one use of chlorine worldwide, and this is how it looks. This is how chlorine, elemental chlorine, which is different than bleach, is used. And for that, Earl from Ally Universal is gonna, who is an expert on all things considered chlorine. He hails out of Miami, Florida, and a lot of customers in the Caribbean, and he is the expert on matters relating to emergency response and emergency training for chlorine. So he's going to talk to us about chlorine versus bleach. Earl?
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. You have to bear with me. This is the first time I've ever been a presenter on a webinar. I've always done it in person before. But we'll kick this off and try to get this rolling, and hopefully everyone will learn something today.
Yeah, sorry, Earl, I had to reshare my screen.
Not a problem.
So hopefully you can see it now.
Yep.
If you can see it.
Yep, I can see it just fine.
Which one is it? Oh, I think I lost it there again. Hold on, just a second. It's this one. Screen number 2. Okay. There it is. Share. Okay. Okay.
And if any of y'all have questions after this, please feel free to submit any questions that you have. Is there any way you can blow that screen up a little bit more? There you go.
Yes.
Okay, the first thing that go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to start off, but if you had something to say, you can go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Earl. Again, I'm sorry. This slides are a little wonky.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, the first screen we're looking at here is chlorine versus bleach. And as you can see, the chlorine is on the left-hand side of the screen. It's got a UN number of 17, and it's got a number 2 down in the bottom. The number 2 stands for what class it falls in. It falls into class 2, which means it's a gas. That's how they're classifying it, how the United Nations classifies it. The one on the right is, of course, bleach, and it's got a UN number of 1791. There's always a lot of confusion amongst people. People use bleach for pools and they call it chlorine, and it's not, bleach is not chlorine. They're 2 different items. Chlorine has a strong, pungent bleach-like odor, and it has a lot of industrial uses, and it's shipped as a compressed liquefied lethal gas, so there is a lethal exposure risk, and the chemical name is chlorine. So, and of course, bleach always has a bleach-like odor. It's what you typically use in your house is less than 6% in strength. What is typically used at a water treatment plant can be anywhere from 10% in strength all the way up to 30% in strength. And it is and it's a liquid, so we all know that. And it's corrosive, bleach is, and its chemical name is sodium hypochlorite, but everybody just calls it bleach. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
Okay, now we're back on chlorine here. So the left-hand picture is the National Fire Protection Agency diamond. And as you can see off to the left, we got a number 4 in the health hazard. We got a 0 up top in the fire hazard, and we got a 0 up there in on the right-hand side in the reactivity. And at the bottom one is the oxy, because it is considered an oxidizer. So, and of course the UN number is 1017. Go ahead and click to the next screen, please. Okay, chlorine is a clear amber color, but that's only when it was contained inside of a container. If you had a clear container and could look at liquid chlorine, it would be a clear amber color. We're never going to see that unless we're in a lab. It becomes solid at negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the freezing point of it. And it becomes a gas at negative 29 degrees Fahrenheit. And it has a high coefficient of expansion. Volume expands approximately 460 times. Okay, 1 volume of liquid chlorine will expand 460 times in volume when it turns into a gas. So that's what we're trying to get to right there. The vapor pressure increases rapidly with increasing temperatures. So the hotter it gets, the more pressure is going to develop in that container. Okay, liquid chlorine at atmospheric pressure is very cold. So if you had a leak of liquid chlorine anywhere, that leak is anywhere near that leak is going to be cold. As a matter of fact, it'll go into what is called auto refrigeration if it's a small enough leak. If it's a big leak, it's just going to all come out. Go ahead and go to the next slide, if you would, please. Okay. Faint yellowish color at low concentrations, green, yellow at high concentrations. Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And now where it says faint yellow at low concentrations, we'll go into that a little bit and a few more things down, because at really low concentrations, like let's say at 10 parts per million, you're not even going to see it at 10 parts per million. Okay. So we'll go into that here in a little bit. It's 2.5 times heavier than air, which means it's going to settle to the ground. It's going to go into low-lying areas. So, and we'll concentrate in low places and inside of buildings. It's not visible below 25 to 60 parts per million. So that's where they say at low concentrations, it's a yellowish color. You won't see it until it is 25 to 60 parts per million. And that and humidity plays a large part in that. So, okay, inside a container or cylinder, is directly, excuse me, inside a container or cylinder is directly proportional to the temperature of the gas. The pressure of chlorine inside the container, excuse me, is directly proportional to the temperature of the gas, which means that if you put a heat source on that cylinder, the pressure is going to build up in that cylinder. So we want to try to keep heat away from those objects. So next slide, please. This is wet and dry chlorine, the difference between the two of them. Wet chlorine is measured off of what dry chlorine is. They compare the two together, and if it's got more moisture than dry chlorine should have, then it's considered wet chlorine, no matter how much, even if it's just a little bit or a lot. If it's got more than what dry chlorine should have, then it's considered wet chlorine. And it is very reactive and corrosive to most metals. It forms two different types of acid, which eats steel rather rapidly. Okay, dry chlorine, chlorine with a water content less or equal to that of which would exist of the gas in the equilibrium with dry liquid chlorine by increasing the pressure at the same temperature. It's compatible, dry chlorine is compatible with most metals except titanium, and it reacts violently with aluminum and tin. Let's see, steel above 450, it reacts violently with. So you never want to have old dry chlorine ever be in a steel container and reach a temperature of 450 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Okay, it reacts violently with greases, oils, paint, and some solvents. Some metal like steel wool, it'll burst into flames. It is combustion above 480 degrees Fahrenheit. Chlorine can support combustion. And that's the key word, it can support combustion. That's the reason why in the National Protection Fire Diamond, you see a 0 in there. It'll support it. It won't catch on fire itself. It's got to have something that it's going to react with, like the steel, when the steel reaches 480 degrees Fahrenheit. Next slide, if you would, please. And this is a video showing steel wool.
Can you hear the video or not?
No, we cannot.
Oh, okay.
So what they did there is they took a piece of steel wool and put it in a, there you go.
Come down to a half inch or so.
This is a good reaction. This is even better.
See some of the flame up in here.
Yeah.
Here we go now.
Look at that.
Wicked, huh?
That's awesome.
We got the sparkles in
Y'all
the
can pull
bottom.
that down a little bit if you want. Just
So that video shows just how instantaneously it will do something when it's reacting with something that's not compatible with, like steel. That was steel wool there. You know, it'll react violently with grease, oil, and other things that it's not compatible with. So, next slide.
Cylinder, ton container, tank car, or cargo tank is a liquefied gas under pressure. The temperature of that liquefied gas is cool, but not so cold that the exterior of the container would be cold to the touch. At higher pressures, liquids boil at higher temperatures. At lower pressures, liquids boil at lower temperatures. This is why water boils at lower temperatures at higher elevations above sea level. The atmospheric pressure is lower, so the boiling point is lower. When a chlorine container is punctured, allowing the chlorine to release, at first the chlorine will escape rapidly. As the chlorine is released, the container that was under pressure will now equalize in pressure with the atmosphere. Once the liquid level drains below the puncture point, auto-refrigeration takes place. Auto-refrigeration is the result of chlorine quickly escaping from the container, which causes the chlorine to cool down below its boiling point at the new lower pressure condition. It becomes colder because it is no longer under pressure from being in an enclosed container. Because the chlorine remaining in the container is so cold, a visible frost layer will form on the outside of the container at the liquid line, which is typically the level of the puncture. When this occurs, the rate of release will significantly decrease, although there still is a considerable amount of liquid chlorine remaining in the container. However, any heat source, like water, or agitation, like moving the container to a secure location, can cause the remaining liquid chlorine to vaporize and allow more vapor chlorine to escape.
Okay, next slide. This was out at Jackrabbit 1, 2, and 3, where DHS, Department of Homeland Security, wanted to see what would happen during the release of chlorine. We released anywhere from 5 tons and 10 tons at different times, all the way up to, I think, all the way up to 20 tons that we did in one shot, one time.
I think this video, Earl, what it wants to do is how wants to compare at initial, how
Right.
we can see the cloud at the initial release, and then 10 minutes after, you can see the cloud sort of become smaller. However, there's still chlorine
Right.
present at the you can see the green, white, yellow, greenish hue there with chlorine. And even then, this is at 30 minutes after the release. You can still, even though you cannot see it anymore, there's still chlorine present. Is that correct?
Right, there was. Now, wind also played a role in these tests because we waited for the wind to be blowing at a certain speed and in a certain direction. What should be noted about one of these tests, I think the first ones that we did, we had some birds that come and flew and sat on top of the tank right after we did the release, and then they flew off afterwards. It didn't hurt any of them. Because they were high enough up off the ground. So if they had been down along the ground, it would have damaged them. So. Combustion and flammability. Go ahead and click to the next screen. Chlorine is not flammable. Okay, and it goes back to the fire diamond again. There's 0 up there in the fire part of it. Chlorine will support combustion in the presence of ignitable, flammable materials. Okay, that would be like that steel wool. Combustion requires 4 things: heat, fuel, oxidizer. Hence, the reason chlorine supports combustion, it has secondary classification as an oxidizer and a chemical chain reaction. Next slide. National Fire Protection Association, BC type fire extinguishers shall be used in areas where chlorine is used because they use sodium bicarbonate, which does not react with chlorine. Water-based A-type fire extinguishers may also be used. Fire extinguishers such as ABC type that use an ammonium-based chemical or a halidins shall not be used around chlorine in any form, either as gas, powder, pellets, or liquid. Do not spray water directly on a leak. If you spray water directly on a leak, you're going to create the 2 forms of acid, which is highly corrosive, and it's just going to make your leak even worse. The reason why you would want to use water around a chlorine cylinder or a chlorine ton is if there was a fire and they weren't leaking. You want to try and keep the containers cool. Next slide. If fire is present or immediate chlorine containers and equipment should be moved away from the fire if it is possible to do so safely. If a non-leaking container or equipment cannot be moved, it should be kept cool by applying water on it. Whenever containers have been exposed to flames, cooling water should be applied until well after the fire is out and the containers are, next screen. Until the containers are cool. This one seems to jump around quite a bit. Okay, the definition, the amount of pressure exerted by the vapor against the walls of its container at given temperature. So what's this showing is that what would happen if that container got hot, and it shows you that the pressure drastically increase. And when it starts to increase and it gets too much, you're going to cause something to explode, or the fuse plug is going to release on there. Next screen, please. Containers are only filled approximately 82.5%, so they're never filled completely full. Okay, at 156 degrees Fahrenheit, liquid chlorine expands to fill the container. That's the reason why we only fill them to 82.5. Once liquid fills the container at 156, any further temperature rise corresponds to much more rapid rise in pressure due to hydrostatic pressure increases, as this chart here shows. So you can look on one side and you get temperature and the pressure that is increasing. So next slide. If a container becomes overfilled due to filling error or the incorrect manifolding of liquid feed lines at a customer's facility, the pressure buildup can exceed the rating of the container, potentially resulting in a major disaster. What you're looking at on a ton container, the ends will pop out. It's designed that way. They won't completely, break away from the container. They just bulge outwards. That allows it to expand a little more. Both ends are capable of doing this. Generally, if it happens, though, you'll start developing small leaks on the container around the valves and around the fuse plugs. So that's something you want to watch out for. Next slide. Okay, vapor expansion. Definition, the amount of vapor that is produced when the liquid vaporizes. Vapor expansion of liquid chlorine is approximately 460 to 1. So a 150-pound cylinder of chlorine, if it's full and it's released, will fill a room that is 10 foot by 10 foot by 8 foot with 100% chlorine gas. Next slide. So if you mix it with water, it really doesn't mix well with water, as it shows you here. It's less than 7% will mix with water at 20 degrees Celsius. Liquid chlorine is approximately 1.5 times heavier than water. So that gives you the equation for that. Next slide. And it also talks about the two acids there, which is hydrochlorous, and go back to that slide again. At the bottom there, it shows you the two acids that will form when you mix chlorine with water, and that's hypochlorous acid and hydrochloric acid. Next slide now. An example of a cylinder that had water sucked back into it is on the right there. Chlorine has limited solubility in water and creates a thin layer of acids that corrode the cylinder wall like a laser. And I will tell you from experience that this will happen within less than 24 hours. It'll happen rapidly that you'll start developing holes in that cylinder. So next slide, please. Chlorine health effects. So at 0.2 to 0.4, that's the odor threshold. That's when you can start smelling the chlorine. At 0.1 part per million, that's the ACGIH, and that's the 8-hour time wait average that they suggest for people. At 0.4 parts per million, that is the short-term exposure limit. At 1 part per million, that's the OSHA ceiling limit for it with the peel. At 1 to 3 parts per million, you're going to experience mild mucous membrane irritation tolerant up to 1 hour. At 5 to 15 parts per million, that's moderate irritation of respiratory tract. The IDLH threshold for this is actually listed as 10 parts per million. And it will cause severe eye irritation and impending ability to escape. At 25 to 60 parts per million, it starts to become visible. So, and that's where I go back to say that by the time you see it, you've already gone above the IDLH, which is 10 parts per million. So you want to be careful when you go into a room that you think there's leaky container into, because you may look in the door glass and see that you don't see anything, so you think it's safe, and it could not be safe. At 30 parts per million, immediate chest pain, vomiting, and cough. Okay, at 40 to 60 parts per million, that's toxic pneumonia and a pulmonary edema, which could lead to death. You got to be, if you get pulmonary edema, you got to be under observation for 24 hours to make sure that you do not die. At 430 parts per million, it's lethal after over 30 minutes. At 1,000 parts per million, it's fatal within a few minutes. Next slide, please. Okay, so we got the types of hazards, exposures, the acute symptoms, and the first aid that you would use to take care of this. And that's inhalation, that's irritation of the mucous membranes and the respiratory tract, respiratory distress, and pulmonary edema, rapid breath, coughing, and you may even cough up blood. Okay, so the first aid for that is move the individual to fresh air, elevate for adequate breathing. Let's see, breathing has approached. So, and if a person has stopped breathing, you want to perform CPR, and you also want to notify your 911. That's what we use here. I don't know what your emergency contact number is out there where you all are. For skin, contact with the skin will cause local chemical thermal burns. I mean, so you can actually get frostbite, and you can actually get a chemical burn from, because frostbite is actually, you can get a chemical burn from that. So somebody that's gotten this on their skin needs to immediately go to an emergency shower. They should remove all of their contaminated clothing, and they should wash off for at least 15 to 20 minutes. I suggest more than 20 minutes. A minimum to me would be 20 minutes. Okay, but the Chlorine Institute recommends 15 to 20 minutes of washing off. Okay, do not attempt to neutralize this if it's on your skin with another chemical. Some people who have tried that in the past have resulted in getting a chemical burn from the reaction of the two chemicals together. So you don't want to do that. Okay, whoops. Eye exposure. For some reason, hang on with me, bear with me for a second. For some reason, I downsized my window. Okay. Okay, eye exposure. It can cause irritation, even at low parts per million, and actually can cause serious damage to your eyes. What you immediately want to do is go to an eye wash station, and you want to wash your eyes for 15 to 20 minutes. And as I said before, I would probably do it for 20 minutes or more. And in each one of these cases, I would notify, an emergency medical in order to take care of the individual. Ingestion. This is highly unlikely that anybody's ever going to ingest chlorine. If it does happen, you're going to have to seek medical attention immediately. Next slide. Storage and handling. Next slide. You always want to store the chlorine containers in dry areas away from direct sunlight if possible. Ton containers, empty or full, should not be stored on the ground. They should be stored away from heat sources and incompatible materials. An example in instances here, heaters in small buildings. You don't want to store your chlorine cylinders or tons next to heaters. You don't want to, because your fuse plug can melt when the heater kicks on. So you want to keep them away from any type of heat whatsoever. And that's also going to cause the pressure to build up in that cylinder or the ton container, the hotter the container becomes. Okay. You should be storing your cylinders in ton containers in a area that has gas detection equipment. Should be located near sensors, your gas sensors. The gas sensors should be calibrated and maintained and replaced per manufacturer's recommendation. Access to cylinders and ton containers for emergency response and fire protection. Next screen, please. Chlorine cylinders should always be stored in an upright position. Cylinders should be secured and protected from being contacted or damaged by moving equipment. Can be secured by placing them securely in containment racks designed for cylinders, or by using chains or straps chained to secure them to a wall or a post to prevent them from tipping over. Cylinders could also be stored in what we call nesting, and there's pictures of nesting off to the right. And as you can see, they're kind of interlocked all together, which means that if you bump one, you more than likely will not knock them over. If you had them all in a straight line and you bumped one, you could knock it over. Next slide, please. Individual cylinders should be chained or clamped to a hand truck or otherwise secured to the moving device for unloading or relocating. If secured in a storage rack, a forklift can be used. Cylinders should not be lifted by the valve protective housing, which is what a lot of people call a bonnet. It should never be picked up by that, which is not designed to carry the weight of the cylinder. Next slide, please. Individual, there we go. Connecting and disconnecting. Next slide. There we go. Chlorine cylinders, typical. I got a question for you. Are your slides out of order?
The
one before
no.
that said connecting and disconnecting, and then it immediately goes into, now click the next one.
The next, okay.
Yeah, see, now it goes into typical leak points.
Okay.
See? Yeah, I thought I come across that once or twice before in this presentation.
Let me see if that's the one we shared with you, but.
Which is kind of throwing me off here.
Okay,
I mean, I can talk about connecting and disconnecting without the slides, but.
Okay. Just very quickly.
Because the connecting and disconnecting slides show pictures of the valve and show the yoke and, and stuff like that on there.
Yeah. Open up another one. No, that's actually how I have it. Well, it does talk about cylinders, valves, and then it talks about connection and disconnection. So I guess it introduces the concept of, what a valve is, and then what disconnecting and connecting refers to. So
I'll see if I can.
that's
I'll see if I can
okay.
send you the one that I did from 2019 down in Fort Lauderdale, and you can look and see the differences between the two presentations.
Okay. Okay. Or do you want to share your screen and show that one?
I don't know if I can pull it up or not.
Okay.
I mean, we can talk about it. I mean, because there are a few critical points about connecting and disconnecting.
Yes.
Number one is that a new washer should be used every time you hook up to a cylinder or ton. People in the past have used washers repeatedly until they think they're bad and can't use them anymore. I mean, if you're taking a risk of having a leak and exposing yourself to chlorine by reusing old washers continuously until they go completely bad. It's just a safe practice to continue, to use a new one each time. You always want to check. Yeah, that's a picture of it. And you also want to check the valve face right there, which is the third arrow down. You want to make sure that there is no gouges in that face, because if there's a gouge all the way across that face, then your lead washer, if you're using lead washers, is not going to seal it off. So you always want to inspect the valve before connecting your yoke to it to make sure it's in good shape. Before you ever open up that cylinder, the second arrow down is the packing nut. You want to put your wrench on there and make sure it is tight. It shouldn't be loose. You shouldn't be able to turn it by your hand. If you can and you open that valve, you may turn, the packing nut may come completely off. You won't have a leak and shouldn't have a leak at that time. But still, it's best to test to make sure that that packing nut is on there tight before opening that valve. So, okay, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. But I will send you my other presentation. That way you can see the difference.
Okay.
So cylinder test dates and tear weight marked on the cylinder shoulder. So on the very top of each cylinder, you're going to find a bunch of numbers, okay? And unless you've worked with them, you may not know what they mean. You're going to have a DOT number, which is Department of Transportation number for the cylinder. You're going to see a number that says, or a letter that says TW, and that's the tear weight of the cylinder, which is the weight of the empty cylinder without the chlorine in it. And then you're going to find a hydro test date on there also. The hydro test date is valid for 5 years. Every ton and cylinder container out there has to be tested every 5 years. Let's see, tear weight, more than one tear weight marking indicates a cylinder was requalified since it was manufactured. And cylinder will lose tear weight over time, and that can happen, but it goes through a hydrostatic test to ensure that it can continue to be used in the shipping of chlorine. So DOT markings, we talked about that. Go ahead and go ahead and click to the next screen. Now, also on the cylinder and ton containers, you're going to find stenciled on here. It's going to say chlorine inhalation hazard with the UN number on there, and it's going to have RQ on it also, which stands for reportable quantity, which tells somebody that if there's a leak in either one of those devices, then they have to report it to a government agency. On a ton container, it's going to have that marking on two opposing sides. On the cylinder, it's only going to have it once. This is the valve. The valve is made out of a brass alloy. The stem is Monal. The packing may be Garlock or Teflon. One full turn allows maximum flow. So I've seen a lot of people open these all the way, which is 3 or 4 turns. You don't need to do that. One turn is enough, because if there is a leak, I would rather shut it off with just one turn than to be standing there having to turn it 4 or 5 times. So you should always keep that in mind. One full turn will allow maximum flow out of that valve. So there's no sense in going beyond that. Always check packing nut before opening. Next slide, please. Fuse plug is part of the valve. This is cylinder valves on the left-hand side of your screen. Wish there was an arrow pointing to it, but the fuse plug is part of the valve. It's only 3/4 of an inch, which is NGT inlet threads, and 4 oversized versions are available. And they are because taking these valves in and out of these cylinders, because everybody who fills cylinders has to inspect the cylinder before they can refill it each time. So that's mandated. So we pull these cylinders out when they come back to be refilled, and they're put back in. So when you do that repeatedly, you have to go up to the next size valve. It doesn't affect the overall valve, all the part that you guys use. It's just the valve threads that screw into the cylinder itself. The ton container valves, there is no fuse plug on them. So if you get a cylinder, if you get a 150-pound cylinder and it doesn't have a fuse plug, somebody put the wrong valve in that 150-pound cylinder. If you get a ton container and it's got a fuse plug on the valve, somebody put the wrong valve in that ton container. You need to notify, somebody immediately of that. You don't be using them if the valves are the incorrect ones. Okay. Let's see, there's no fuse plugs, maybe 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch threads on there. Valve seats opens are larger. So the valve seats are openings are larger than cylinder valves. 4 oversized versions are available. Next slide, please. There we go. A yoke and adapter for use with the CGA valve connections, 820 or 820C, either opens or close yoke is the standard connection to the valve outlet. So we got the picture of the yoke. We got a picture of a valve with the yoke on it. Generally, these yokes can be used on either cylinder or ton container. Washers replaced after each use. Used lead washers must be disposed of properly. Check valves outlet space for imperfections, which is what I was talking about earlier, that may prevent gasket from sealing. Some chlorinators may not require a yoke to mount. There are some out there that don't. CGA connection 660 is not recommended to connect to the cylinder valve. Valve outlet threads are not standard tapped pipe threads. Do not use standard pipe fittings. Next slide. The suggested steps for connecting cylinders or ton containers are: wear the required PPE, protect yourself, remove the valve hood or valve protection bonnet, the bonnets that are on the ton containers. To make certain that the packing nut is at least hand tight. If it is not, contact your supplier for advice. Make certain that the valve is closed before removing the outlet cap. Remove the valve outlet cap. Note that for ton containers, which valves vertically align, the upper valve dispenses gas and the lower valve dispenses liquid. Make certain the valve face is clean and smooth. Use a new appropriate ring gasket connection yoke and yoke adapter to the valve. Never reuse gaskets. Tighten the yoke to make sure a good seal, but do not over tighten. Next one. The suggested steps for disconnecting a cylinder or ton container are: wear PPE. Close valve using torque wrench to a torque of 25 to 30 foot-pounds. Check for pressure drop to 0. If leak persists, as indicated by pressure increase torque up to 40 foot-pounds. If valve still leaks, increase torque up to 50 foot-pounds. Never go above 50 foot-pounds. If leaks still exist, contact the supplier. If pressure remains constant at or below 0 psi, remove the connection. So you know that if it's reaches 0 and stays there, that it's not leaking. It's good to it's good to remove the yoke at that time. Verify that the outlet gasket is in place and replace the valve outlet cap. Say valve hood or bonnet on the cylinder or ton container and appropriate and mark as empty. Place the cylinder or ton container in an appropriate location for empty containers. Next slide, please. Excessive torque does not usually help the situation. Okay. If valve is difficult to open, a sharp blow to the wrench versus a low increase in pressure on the wrench may open the valve. Alternate is to return the cylinder to your supplier. So if you get a ton or cylinder container in there and you can't open it, every now and then you can put the wrench on there and, give it a sharp blow to the wrench and it may pop it open. But don't beat on it. You don't want to break the valve stem off, and you don't want to get it open to where you can't close it either. So it's just best to contact your supplier. Yep. Okay. A plastic squeeze bottle containing a 10 to 30% solution of aqua ammonia can be used to check for leaks. Okay. Direct vapor, never use the liquid, always the vapor from the squeeze bottle at the potential leak source. Okay. Ammonia is in household cleaners is not suitable for this purpose. It's too low of a concentration. Next screen, please. Okay, minor leaks. If the packing gland is the source of the leak, first close the valve and then tighten the packing gland nut. If it still leaks, make sure the valve is closed, then retighten the packing gland. Care must be taken when tightening the packing gland. If through fusible plug the cylinder, apply the A-kit. Contact your supplier if through threads at cylinder or ton opening. Apply A-kit for cylinder and B-kit for ton containers. Contact your supplier. And if you have a recovery vessel, you can use a recovery vessel for the cylinder. I don't know how many people may be familiar with a recovery vessel, but you can slide a full 150-pound cylinder into a recovery vessel. Okay, let's see. Oops. Remember, leaks only get worse. Take action when the leaks are noticed. If you just walk away and think it's a small leak and it'll go away, it will not go away. It will only get bigger. Please label or tag any bad valves or so supplier can follow up with the issue. On ton containers, you got 2 valves on them. What we generally suggest is that you take a marker and circle the valve that is causing you problems, whether it's hard to open or whether it's leaking. Ensure the leak detection solution is of adequate strength. If using an aqua ammonia solution, use only vapor from the 26 Bume aqua ammonia or stronger for leak detection. Weaker solutions may not be concentrated enough to detect minor leaks. It is acceptable to use other concentrations based on successful experience. Next slide, please. Take a break or we can move on.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I was thinking maybe we should just keep going, given that
Yep,
we're
I'm
a
fine with
little
that.
behind. We're behind, and we still have a lot of material to cover.
Yep,
Okay.
I'm fine.
Yeah, I
Next slide.
suggest we continue. Yeah, that's fine.
Chlorine emergency response. Next slide. Okay, this is your emergency kits. You're looking at an A kit. You're looking in the upper left-hand corner. In the upper right-hand corner, you're looking at a recovery vessel for 150-pound cylinders and smaller cylinders. In the lower left-hand corner, you're looking at a B kit. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you're looking at a C kit for rail cars. Next slide. This is a Midland kit, which is different from the other kits you said seen above, and that is a rail car kit. And then you're also looking at a rail car kit, which is a CAWASA rail car kit. Next slide.
Device 12 can be used to contain all leaks in and around the container valves. Remove the valve protective hood if in place and position the container so that the leaking valve is in the top or gas position. This results in a chlorine gas leak and not a liquid leak. Use the paint scraper to remove paint, scale, and rust from the face of the container. Place the adjustable end of bar assembly 28C inside and on the bottom of the chime lip, with the bar extensions resting outside the chime. Compress assembly downward using handles. Insert the upper end of bar assembly inside the chime. Reduce resistance to allow unit to expand into the upper chime lip, with the upper bar extensions resting on the outside of the chime. Place a new gasket on hood 12A. Open the vent valve on hood 12A and remove the outlet cap. Install hood 12A over the leaking valve. Hand tighten the screw 28D, forcing the hood 12A and gasket against the head of the container. Close vent valve 12V on the hood using wrench 200B. Replace the vent valve outlet cap. After the kit has been applied, periodically check for leaks because pressure will build up inside the hood. Device 12 can be Device 14 can be used to contain all leaks in and around the fusible plug. Position the container so that the leaking fusible plug is in the top or gas position. This results in a chlorine gas leak and not a liquid leak. Use the paint scraper to remove paint, scale, and rust from the face of the container. Place the adjustable end of bar assembly 28C inside and on the bottom of the chime lip, with the bar extensions resting outside the chime. Compress the assembly downward using the handles. Insert the upper end of the bar assembly inside the chime. Reduce resistance to allow the unit to expand into the upper chime lip, with the upper bar extensions resting on the outside of the chime. Tighten locking screw 28G until hand tight. Place a new gasket 4-12 BMV on the hood 14A. Loosen locking lever on screw 28D unit and slide over the leaking fusible plug. Install the hood 14A. Hand tighten screw 28D, forcing the hood and gasket against the head of the container. After the kit has been applied, periodically check for leaks because pressure will build up inside the hood.
Okay, it should be noted, guys, that that was a B kit. There are now 2 B kits out there. That is the new style B kit. There is an older style B kit that everybody may be familiar with. So just know that there's 2 different types of kits out there now from Indian Springs. And that one you just seen is easier to use and apply than the old kit is. It's a lot lighter and everything. Anytime you're ready, Marco, you can go ahead and flip to the next one.
I am in. What does it look? What does it look right now? What does it show?
It says cylinder case study.
Okay. Okay. Can you see now the
Yes.
case study number 1? Okay.
Individual was, okay, this is an example of an incident that happened. Individual was cleaning out an old storage unit and uncovered a compressed gas cylinder. Okay, the red flags would have been if when he was looking at it, was cylinder was not labeled it was in very rough shape and it was rusted. He could not figure out how to open the valve, and the cylinder felt empty. Bronze valve had scrap value. Click to the next slide, please. So the individual attempted to remove the valve by striking it off, probably with a hammer. There was still an estimated gallon of chlorine in the cylinder. So when he struck the valve, there was a release. St. Paul Fire Department was called to the scene. Multiple individuals were transported to the hospital. Cylinder appeared to have essentially stopped releasing material. No call to Chemtrek was made, not in transportation. So unfortunately, it's one of those incidences, and there's numerous ones out there with cylinders. Next slide, please. St. Paul Fire Department has a well-funded hazmat team with their own salvage cylinder, auto refrigeration. They assumed it was empty. The assumed cylinder was empty, and they were just seeing residue gas based on the small amount of vapor coming out of it. Because of the small amount of liquid left in the cylinder, the frost line was hidden on the bottom, so they couldn't see exactly how much was in there. This lack of situational awareness resulted in exposure to cold liquid chlorine to 2 members of the fire department when they attempted to pick up the cylinder. They finally called Chemtrek. Next slide, please. So this is another scenario. A person wanted to sell a cylinder for scrap and hammered off the valve thinking it was only propane. 911 was called. 8 people were sent to the hospital. Next slide. Local firefighters responded and attempted to put cylinder in a recovery vessel, spilling auto-refrigerated liquid chlorine in the process. Local hazmat response was activated. A local private emergency response contractor called. The private contractor called Chlorine team for advice. Note, they had previously met at a Transcar event. The Chlorine team leader urged the contractor to officially activate Chlorine through Chemtrek. Next slide, please. Okay, the cylinder was safely in a recovery vessel at this time. The Chlorine team leader called secondary team. Secondary team retrieved cylinder the next morning and properly disposed of it. Next slide. In the aftermath of a devastating hurricane season in late 2017, particularly Hurricane Harvey in Houston, Texas, an orphaned 150-pound chlorine cylinder washed off into an abandoned private residence. A passerby notified the local fire department, which notified a local hazmat team and called Chemtrek. Chlorine team in Sector 14 was deployed and retrieved the leaking cylinder by placing it in a recovery vessel. Note, after this incident, Chlorine training received another call from the same hazmat team at another abandoned industrial facility affected by the hurricane to retrieve a non-leaking orphan cylinder. This all did not come through Chemtrack. Next screen, okay. County Fire Marshal and the local hazmat team stated that the leaky cylinder was located within the perimeter of the residence of the resident's yard. The bottom base of the cylinder was corroded and leaking. No visible cloud formed, but a bleach-like smell could be detected. No reported injuries. ChlorRep team could not identify the origin of the cylinder due to its degree of deterioration. Things to remember: stay alert during and after strong hurricanes, which may produce more of these cases. Do not use water to mitigate the leak. Next. Community preparedness and public protective actions. Next. Protect the public from harm. Number one, that's number one item. Protect the actions and initiated after. Protective actions initiated after. Isolation perimeter is established. Shed and hazardous control zones are defined. Tactical options. Notification, reverse 911, evacuation, shelter in place, a combination, not mutually exclusive, which means you don't have to follow this exact step depending upon what's going on in your area. Okay.
Since chlorine is heavier than air and will settle in low-lying areas, people should move to upper floors if possible. Do not go to the basement. In many communities, especially in the tornado-prone Midwest, the general public has been trained to move to underground shelters or basements in an emergency. This is the exact opposite of what should be done during a chlorine release, as chlorine gas may find its way into basements. Move upstairs or to higher floors if possible. However, do not move to an attic. While attics may be the highest level in a house, they are typically vented in such a manner that they cannot be effectively sealed with duct tape and sheeting. These may include ridge vents, gable vents, and exhaust vents. In order to help prevent a gas cloud from seeping into the structure, quickly close all doors and windows and seal them with duct tape and plastic sheeting. From the inside, jam wet towels on exterior door bottoms and thresholds. Turn off any air conditioning, heating systems, whole house fans, and bathroom exhaust fans. The public may think that running an exhaust fan may help expel any chlorine gas that may have entered the premises, but this could actually create a vacuum or chimney effect, drawing in the chlorine gas. For maximum protection, shelter-in-place occupants should go to a windowless room, such as an interior bathroom. It's critical that occupants stay connected to first responders, so they need to take a means of communication with them into the safe room: cell phone, telephone, walkie-talkie, CB, or radio. Shelter-in-place occupants must remain in place and wait for instructions. They need to wait for rescuers to come to them. They cannot assume it's safe to emerge until instructed to do so. Finally, practicing home emergency drills is always recommended so occupants know what to do in case of a fire or weather-related emergency, and a chlorine emergency is no different. Occupants should discuss, plan, and practice the actions they'll take in the event of an incident.
So a list of things you should consider. Practice home emergency drills, know what to do in an emergency, discuss plans and practice emergency actions. And it should be the same at every one of your facilities. Next slide. Security concerns, possible crime scene, evidence preservation, suspicious surroundings and behaviors, notifications, and ensure you have identified contacts prior to any incident. Who to call and when, perimeter security, entry into the incident site. In today's age, we have to be concerned about terrorism, so we never know whether it's an accident or a possible terrorist strike. Next slide. Take the time now to educate the public on shelter in place. Describe how the public will be informed of a chemical emergency in your area of operations. Explain the steps to be taken in the event a shelter-in-place order is given. Close all doors and windows. Turn off any air handling units. Seal any openings with wet towels, tape, and plastic sheeting. Instruct public to remain calm and use local news and radio and information sources. Instruct them not to call 911. If driving, pull to a safe spot, turn off your car and listen to the radio until officials have given the all clear. Next screen. A simple shelter-in-place kit contains clear small plastic tote, a flashlight, spare batteries, a roll of duct and masking tape, a weather radio, a first aid kit, bottled water, and non-perishable snacks. Once officials say the emergency is over, turn on fans and other things that are circulate air. Everyone should go outside until the building's air has been exchanged with the now clean outside air. For more details, read FEMA's guidelines for staying put. Next slide. This is published by the Department of Transportation, DOT, and Transportation Canada, Emergency Response Guidebook. That's the 2016 Emergency Guidebook. And you can download a free one, the free phone app from Android and iPhone. Next slide, please. Okay. Initial isolation device distances and protective action distances. Isolation distances, those distances are less than the protective action distances and provides radius zones, initial isolation zones around the incident within which all public should be evacuated. Okay. Protective action, this distance is downwind from the initial isolation. The zone covering a cone-shaped area and the public within the zone may be evacuated or sheltered in place distances. Note, the ERGs does not specify the protective action should always be an evacuation or should always be a shelter in place. That emergency guide, if you look in there, it'll cover small leaks and large leaks, and it gives you an evacuation distance, within to initially start evacuating people in case you have an incident. Next page, please. The facility's emergency response plan should be coordinated with the emergency management agencies. Evacuation versus shelter-in-place decisions will always have to be made. Response capabilities of the facility, response capabilities of outside agencies and contractors. Additional information on emergency planning is available from the Chlorine Institute, pamphlet 64, Emergency Response Plans for Chlor-alkali and Sodium Hypochlorite and Hydrogen Chloride Facilities. The Chlorine Institute FR-DVD, Chlorine Emergencies, and Overview of First Responders. Let's see, Emergency Managers Agencies. Emergency management agencies, fire departments. Next slide, please. Personal protective equipment, PPE. Next slide.
And this, just very quickly, there is a question in the chat, and if you have questions, please type them up there. There is a question on what's the recommended and required PPE needed when changing 150 pounds and 1 ton chlorine cylinders. We'll explore that there.
Okay. So, okay, PPE. 4 areas where chlorine is stored and used. Okay. Escape respirators available. Normal working clothing. Compliance with facilities PPE requirements. For initial line breaks, a line break is defined as the opening of a line, section of a line, a vessel, or other equipment that contains or previously contained chlorine and includes equipment that was returned to chlorine service and is reopened to the atmosphere. An initial line break is considered maintenance activity and does not include the act of connecting or disconnecting containers from loading and unloading purposes or materials sampling activities. Chlorine gas full face respirator. Chlorine line full face respirator protective gloves. PPE recommended above based on facility. Everybody out there should have performed a hazardous. I'll go into that here in a little bit. Sorry about that. Okay. Recommendation above based on facility. Has performed the industrial hygiene sample. Okay. Employees have been trained. Has a system for purging and evacuating piping before line break. Next page. Escape respirators only for evacuations, contaminated area immediately. So this is only if you have a leak and you have to run out of the building. That's the only time you're going to use the escape respirator. Must have sufficient oxygen level in order to use one of them. They are not meant for going in and stopping a leak, only for evacuation. Full face respirators must be medically approved. Fit testing is required annually in order to wear a full face respirator. Must know concentration of chlorine and it be within the respirator's limitations. Okay, some ones I used are get up to 10 parts per million. So they're only good up to that point. If it's at 11 parts per million, that full face cartridge respirator isn't going to do me any good. Okay, so let's see. If level is not known, then SCBA is required. Must have sufficient oxygen levels in order to use the full face cartridge filter. Next page. Okay, gas. It's a gas self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA for short, positive pressure, level B self-sealing suit or chemical, tape on hands, feet openings, not qualified for confined spaces. You can't use them in confined spaces. Key features of this options of PPE are they are self-contained chemical resistance to protect against the effects of liquid and gaseous chlorine. Okay, the liquid chlorine self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, positive pressure, enhanced level B, chemical protection suit, footwear covering, hood for head, neck protection, thermal underwear. Okay, go ahead and click to the next screen. Level B is defined as either single or multi-piece chemical splash suits, SCBA, and appropriate gloves and footwear protection. A picture of individuals wearing some. Next screen. Okay, let's see. Positive pressure, full face self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, or air supplying respirator, ASR, with an auxiliary self-contained air supply, escape air provision, protective clothing, including the following items: chemical protective suit, footwear or footwear cover, hood for protection of head and neck, and undergarments to provide thermal protection for exposure to liquid chlorine and asphyxia and anhydrous chloride. That's an example of that. Click to the next screen. Chlorine gas will permeate any opening in your protective gear, which can result in moderate to severe skin irritation. Turnout gear will also absorb chlorine and continue to off gas after the responder leaves the hot zone. Serious secondary exposure to personnel after leaving the hot zone. Next screen. Additional training.
I can take it from
Go
here.
ahead.
These are some Chlorine Institute resources that can be found on our website, chlorineinstitute.org. We have pamphlets, videos, like I mentioned. There's in our YouTube channel. There's lots of videos on how to handle all the chlor-alkali chemicals properly. Wall charts in English, Spanish, and French for handling chlorine cylinders, ton containers, handling sodium hypochlorite, sodium hydroxide, etc., handling chlorine. We also have emergency kit booklets and videos, and we maintain a technical service inbox on our email, techsvc@cl2.com. You can send any non-emergency technical question. If you come up with a question, after the seminar, we can certainly take a look at it and answer it via email. And one of the main resources actually that we have here on the screen, it's pamphlet 155, which is the Water and Wastewater Operating Chlorine Handbook. This is, and I quote, this is the water and wastewater Bible of operators and water treatment plants here in the United States. Most of water utility facilities in the U.S. follow the or use this handbook on a regular basis. There's also, we have, there's other organizations like the American Water Works Association, the Water Environmental Federation, the National Rural Water Association that provide additional training and information, such as safety data sheets, among others, also videos and best practices. And they're all pretty active also on social media, as we are. So feel free to connect with us and keep up with us on social media. You can like our Chlorine Institute Facebook page, follow us on Twitter at the Chlorine INST, and you can visit and follow us on LinkedIn as well to see more updates on pamphlets, videos, and more. So we are right on the money, Ignatius, 5:30, and we're done.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let me address that person's question about PPE, if you would, please,
Yes.
real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
The individual had asked about the PPE. Here in the United States, the government requires that we do a process hazard analysis of our facilities, and we have to redo that every 5 years, okay? And so that's to identify hazards in the workplace and stuff like that, okay? And there are also, the American companies are required, who are dealing in chlorine, are required to do a PPE assessment for every job in that facility that's where you're dealing with hazardous chemicals. So we go in there and look at that and see what they need. And then also based on incidents that happen, such as accidents, we may increase the level of PPE. So there is no really one set guideline. It should be based upon your process hazard analysis and on your PPE analysis for each task that is performed at a facility is what you base your PPE requirements off of. And also, like I said, off of incidences that happen if someone gets injured, then you probably didn't have adequate PPE. So I hope that helps somebody a little bit there. That's all I have to say on that. So
I said I'm in some sessions still. That's why I can't come and open for you.
Do what?
Thank you. No, thank you. I think Ignatius was talking to someone else, but
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you, Earl, for answering that question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there's another question in the chat room. Was it?
If we got time, throw it up there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's see, the question is, what's the best resource of replacement parts for kit A and kit B? How
Indian
regular
Springs.
should the caps be replaced or serviced? Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Indian Springs is a manufacturer of that Indian Springs A kit and B kit. The Chlorine Institute has the information on how to contact them. So the Chlorine, so the Chlorine Institute, if you ever forget it, is the quickest way to find that information out, and it's actually on their website too, and and I think it's also here. So. And you can contact Indian Springs to get the new kits, the old parts for the old kits and parts for the new kits for the gaskets and all of that. The gaskets, you always have to follow the manufacturer's recommendation, which is every 4 years they have to be replaced.
No, I was showing
And that's
contact
Chlorine.
information.
Yeah.
I was just showing some contact information for Indian Springs, but you know, if you have a question, certainly follow up with us at the Chlorine Institute or through Ignatius. He can certainly forward it to us, and we'll handle that.
Well, I'm going to send you all the links, all the everybody registered here today. I can send you that information. So if you should want to send anything, or you send it to me and I'll circulate.
Yeah.
Now, the Chlorine Institute does have a pamphlet on how to use the A kit, how to use the B kit, and how to use the C kit. I know because I've been on the review committee for those kits for several years. We go into detail in there, and we also explain when the gaskets have to be replaced and stuff like that. There's a parts list in there of all the equipment that you can get from Indian Springs for the kit. So the Chlorine Institute is a great resource if you want to find out how to get things like that. You can just contact them or go onto their website and get that information off of that.
Yep. Yeah, no, certainly. Like you said, Earl, there's those booklets for Kit A, B, and C are available on the Chlorine Institute bookstore, or you can. That's probably the best way to get them. Nearly everything, every single pamphlet and video is free to get and download from the Chlorine Institute website and the Chlorine Institute bookstore. So feel free to look around, download, and if for some reason you're having issues, you can always email us and we'll get you the right information. So
and they also have videos, which the Chlorine Institute did on how to apply, showing how to apply the A kit, videos on how to apply the B kit. So the Chlorine Institute has invested a lot of money in trying to help keep us all trained in how to do this, and we revise those videos and even those pamphlets every 3 years. Yep.
Yeah. They're reviewed, and it's a periodical revision, make sure everything is up to date, and anything needs to be changed, updated on the booklets and the pamphlets and videos. It gets done periodically. So just want to end by saying thank you to Earl, who comes from a member company, works at a member company, Ally Universal, always investing their time, their effort, their money in making sure we have the right materials, and the end users of these products have the know-how on how to respond to the rare occasions where there's a chlorine or chloralkali related emergency. So thank you very much, Earl and Ally Universal, for all the help. If there's further questions, please let us know via email. I'll get your emails. We'll get you, as we get you your certificates, you'll have our contact information. That way you can give us a call, shoot us an email, or definitely follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and you can even ask questions through there. So there's a ton of resources. There's really no excuse not to reach out and get all this information for free. And like Earl said, it's a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of sweat equity, as we call it here. So Earl, thank you for your sweat equity in this training. And I know Ignatius, you probably want wrap it up with.
Yes, thank you, Marco, and a special thanks to Earl for giving us his time, as you said, the sweat equity, and as well as your time for helping to coordinate this and make it possible. As I said, some couple of years ago, we did this in St. Lucia and it was very successful, but we had to fly people in, and you know, COVID has made us even more resilient and making us access your resources virtually and to bring our operators together. So this is wonderful. I think it was a very good session, and on behalf of the management of CAWASA, I'd like to thank the Chlorine Institute and Earl White for joining us this afternoon, and all of you operators. I trust that you found this to be very useful. We are going to circulate the recording of this training exercise, and of course Zoom gives us the facility to access all the information once you have registered. That's why we get you to register, so we can track whether you participated or not. Okay, so we have all that information. Thank you very much again, Marco, and I'll be following up with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ignatius, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Earl.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, cheers.
All right.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good
Cheers.
evening, everyone. Keep safe.
You too.